memory of yesterday's baptism service, I have to say, and where Matt proved conclusively he should be our regular preacher, basically. And I'm deeply grateful to Alistair for all that's going on in the Hinch household this weekend, that you would still come and lead this service. I'm hugely grateful to you. Thank you so much. I'm very conscious that in the last half of last year, when we were all doing soul keeping, both here in this service and also in the house groups, it was a rather inward-looking and intense programme for many of us. It was quite hard work in lots of ways, although I hope worthwhile. So we thought actually for the first half of this year, we would actually start to look outwards rather than inwards, and we'd focus on something perhaps a bit more practical and something that we can engage with in our everyday lives. And some of us were at the conference at Keswick, the Keswick Convention last year, and I heard a man speak called Mark Green. And Mark is somebody I've known of for a while. He's from the London Institute of Contemporary Christianity, which was something that was set up by John Stott at All Souls Langham Place. And Mark wrote a book a little while ago that made an impression on me called Thank God It's Monday, which was about being Christian at work. And it made a huge impression on me, and I've read his work since then and been greatly impressed by it. Well, he's recently been pursuing a whole initiative called Fruitfulness on the Frontline, and we're shamelessly stealing from that initiative over the coming months. So I wanted to just introduce you to it today, and it will become the agenda of the services as we go forward through this year. And I want to say at the outset, this is absolutely, categorically not another lecture on evangelism, okay, that will send you away feeling guilty that you're not doing it, okay? It's absolutely not that. Mark started off his... Do I have a... Can I rely on you? Next slide. Mark started off with this particular picture, which intrigued me. There are 63 million people in this country, give or take a few, and roughly 6 out of 100 go to church regularly. That's not very many, is it? We recently did some statistics for Claverdon Church. We have to do an annual return to the diocese, and the worshipping community in Claverdon might be slightly nearer 10%, but it's not much more than the national average. And but that still leaves you 3.8 million people who are regularly going to church. Now, here's the interesting point. Those 3.8 million people have connections with 90% of the population. So in other words, there are very few people who walk around completely never meeting anybody who goes to church. It's quite hard to walk around and completely avoid churchgoers, despite the fact that we're not the biggest population in that sense. And those connections are our front line. We're talking about fruitfulness on the front line, so we'll spend a little bit of time working out what the front line means, and a little bit of time talking about what fruitfulness means in order to sort of set the scene for where we're trying to go this year with this series of talks. Okay. First of all, we all have a front line. We don't need to create one, we already have one. Each and every one of us here has a front line. It might be your family, it could be your workplace colleagues, your customers, your suppliers, it could be the people you play golf with or bridge or whatever it is you do with your spare time. It's the people you bump into regularly for whatever reason. People we consult as professionals or even tradespeople or whatever. And it includes also a small group of people who probably cause us a certain amount of difficulty in our lives. They're still also part of our front line. I love the idea that for Bear Grylls, his front line is the jungle, and the people he randomly bumps into includes the President of the United States. Most of us don't quite move in those circles, but we still have a perfectly valid front line. I was reflecting on what my front line would be, and apart from the people I meet through the context of church, there's a whole group of neighbours out there. I don't mean our next door neighbours, because Jill and Jonathan are part of the 3.8 million, obviously, but beyond that, there are lots of neighbours we know who aren't. They're the people I meet when I walk around the village. I always, if I walk and get my paper in the morning, I can guarantee to meet 3 or 4 people every day. Then I always said I'd love a large garden until I got one, so we have a gardener. There's the farmer who keeps his sheep in our field. There's the postman who parks his van in our drive. And there are the cleaners. I have deep and meaningful conversations with all of these people. I've had the same dentist, doctor and hairdresser for 30 years. And I have deep and meaningful conversations with all of them, which are nothing to do with their professions. I have lots of old friends and former colleagues who are well beyond the 3.8 million people. who, despite having known them for years and years, I have apparently made no mark on their life whatsoever. And all these people know my Christian context, and I suspect they have a kind of expectation of me because of that. There's something in the relationship where they expect me to do something which I may or may not be doing. I want to say this, that God is with us on that front line. When Jesus prayed in the Garden of Gethsemane, the night before he was taken, he prayed, first of all, in John 17, he prayed for himself, then he prayed for the disciples, and then he prayed for everybody else. And this was his prayer for everybody else, for you and me. And he said, "My prayer is not for them alone. I pray also for those who will believe in me through their message, that all of them may be one. Father, just as you are in me, I am in you. May they also be in us, so that the world may believe that you have sent me." Frontline is a funny thing. I went the other day to meet with Jonathan Hearn, who's the vicar of the little St. Paul's, the little church by the racecourse. And we wandered into Warwick to have coffee together at Costa, and we sat down and we were chatting, and we were on those sort of tables where we were sitting opposite to each other, and I wasn't aware that we were chatting very loudly, but a lady adjacent to us clearly overheard the conversation. And within a little while, she came and spoke to us and said, "Look, I've just been overhearing your conversation. I guess what you probably do with it, for a living. I just wondered, I want to tell you about some problems I've got. I want to tell you about some problems my daughter's got." And she shared these problems with us. And as she did so, a spirit of boldness came over me. And I said, "Well, can we pray for you?" And so she sat down at our table, and Jonathan and I prayed for this lady quite loudly in the middle of Costa Coffee. And for some reason, I didn't feel at all embarrassed by it. It just seemed right. It seemed natural in that moment. Another occasion, I could have felt really awkward about that. But on this occasion, I didn't. It just felt right. And nobody came and said, "What on earth are you doing?" And she went away, I think, blessed, as we were blessed, actually, by that experience. And we were blessed as much as she was by that particular moment. This set of photographs coming up now comes from many of you have supported our daughter and her husband over many years with what they do in Liverpool, the VIP evenings, which they do, as you know, for people who are homeless, people from hostels, people on the streets. And you'll see here, and a lot of them come with terrible feet, so they come and they bathe their feet in the foot spas. They come and have their hair cut. They have manicurists. They come and get new clean clothes. They get new shoes. And there's a party. There's a great festive meal, and there's entertainment, and there's music. And they are made to feel like VIPs for this part of their life. They're made to feel there's a red carpet as they come in. They're made to feel special. And many of you here have helped Rachel and Judah over many years, contributing in all sorts of amazing ways towards these events. And the verse that has always prompted them in all of this, yesterday we had Jeremiah 29 at Matt's baptism. Here's another bit of Jeremiah 29. It says this: "Seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I have carried you in exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper." It's a call to do God's work where we live, where we are now. They are called to Liverpool, where they live, and they're called to, and their front line is different again. They have made their front line the homeless, but it is a call to be fruitful on the front line. And they're not preaching to these people, they're loving them to bits. Here's another picture. This is this room on Christmas Day this year, just a couple of weeks ago, where people were invited who otherwise might have been on their own on Christmas Day. What an amazing thing that is. That's fruitfulness on the front line in a remarkable way. When we interviewed Chelsea, we interviewed her by Skype when she was still in the US. And one of the things she said to us that really impressed us, and one of the reasons we were so eager to recruit her, was she described what she'd been doing with teenagers, working in what she called service in the community. And she said when they come out of school, they don't want more lessons, they don't want to be taught, they don't want Bible teaching, they want to do something. And she's doing exactly the same thing now. And we see the youth going out and doing amazing service projects with that same heart to be fruitful on the front line, and bless them for all they do. A long time ago, when actually I was just asked Matt what his birth date was so I could fill in the baptism register. Well, your birth date is the day I first went to theological college, interestingly. And I remember one of the very early essays I had to write was how did the church grow in the first 3 centuries? There were no church buildings, there were no sermons, there was no great worship music, there was no fabulous buildings. How on earth did the church grow? And I came across this remarkable quote from Emperor Julian, who was trying to re-engage people with pagan religions. And he said this: Christianity has been specially advanced through the loving service rendered to strangers and through their care in the burial of the dead. It's a scandal that there's not a single Jew who is a beggar, and that they, the Christians, care not only for their own poor, but for ours as well. And while those who belong to us look in vain for the help we should render to them. So there we are in the 3rd century. The church grew not through church as we understand it today, but by loving service, by fruitfulness on their front line. So, we have the front line. We each have the front line. You have it, I have it. We all have the front line. We have those connections. And before we beat ourselves up too much, let's just remember this. God is the evangelist, not you or me. I remember years ago going to see Bishop Collin when he was the Bishop of Coventry, and he asked me if I'd go and talk to him. He wanted to create an appraisal system for the clergy, heaven forbid. And he said to me, how can we go about doing this? And completely tongue-in-cheek, I said to him, why can't we just count the souls they've saved? And he looked at me and peered over his glasses and he said, that's God's job. And it is. It's God's job. It's not our job. God is already at work. We are merely following him. It was the previous Archbishop Rowan Williams who used to say, mission is about spotting where God is going ahead of you and joining in. God is always ahead of us. Our job is simply to follow, to join in. But we are given a tool bag, and that tool bag is fruitfulness. So we know what the front line is. Let's now worry about what fruitfulness means. And we all know off by heart Galatians 5, the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. That's the fruit of the Spirit, but it's our tool bag for being fruitful. These are the things that we can use when we encounter people on the front line. These are the things we have been given. And again, yesterday at the baptism, we were reflecting on John 15, where it says, I chose you, you didn't choose me, I chose you, and I appointed you to bear fruit, fruit that will last. And what an amazing call that is on all of our lives. And in the work that Mark Green is doing up and down the country with this process, this program and this book and study and so on, the key assumption is this, that you are already doing it. You are, all of you, every single one of you, is already doing fruitfulness on the front line. And the assumption is this, that success is more likely to come from catching somebody doing the right things and encouraging them to do more, rather than what we usually do in church, is to beat them up and send them away feeling guilty that they're not being evangelists, that they're not out there preaching the gospel to the milkman. Actually, it's not about going away feeling guilty. It's about going away feeling affirmed that actually you're already doing it, but be aware of how you're doing it and when you're doing it, and maybe even take the opportunity to do it some more. So the agenda over the next few months in this service will be a whole series of ways in which we can be practically fruitful on the front line. And here they are. So this will be the agenda of the services coming up. The first one says, model godly character. It was quite recently, it occurred to me that when you read the New Testament in particular, never does the Bible tell you about anybody's personality. We have no idea about the personalities of people in the Bible. Are they funny? Are they extroverts? Are they optimistic? Are they confident? We don't know anything about those things about people. What we know is about their character. Character is much different. It takes much longer to know somebody's character than it does to know their personality. You can see somebody's personality within seconds. To know their character takes ages. And character is honesty, virtue, kindness. It's those things of a much greater depth than simply the superficial personality things. So step 1 is about modeling a godly character. Step 2 is about make good work. One of my favourite novels, I always loved the books of Neville Shute, and one of my favourite novels is Round the Bend. And in Round the Bend talks about it's set in the Middle East in an aircraft repair workshop where it's led by a man with remarkable spiritual presence. And all the people who work in this workshop, every piece of work they do, they treat as if it was a prayer to God. And they do it in a way that would honour God. This isn't justification by works, for those of you who suddenly think I'm becoming a heretic. It's about honouring God by the way you do each piece of work you do. It's a remarkable thought. And thirdly, we can be fruitful by ministering love and grace. So many times I've seen how incredible it is when you're faced with something really challenging, how you can disarm people with grace rather than rising to the bait. All of us want to rise to the bait. It's instinctive, it's natural, it's in us. But actually grace will always achieve more than rising to the bait every time. Moulding culture. In my working life, there was a distinct period of my working life where I worked for a company that had some very paternalistic values when I joined it, but not when I left it. And I hung on to those values longer than most other people, I think. And I ran a little bit of the company that was an island of one culture in a sea of another. And I took upon myself to bear the tensions of that difference. And at times it was incredibly difficult and painful. But I believed in it passionately. And we all have that opportunity somewhere to mould culture. We can be a mouthpiece for truth and justice. We can stand up for the things that really matter. We can speak out for social justice. And finally, we can be a messenger of the gospel. And even that doesn't necessarily need words. Remember those great words, I've forgotten who said them, go out and preach the gospel, but only use words if you really have to. Remember that great quote? All of these things are about being fruitful, not doing fruitful. It's about how we are, not necessarily the things we actively necessarily physically do. So that's what we're setting out today for the next series of these services on this journey to explore all of this. And I hope that during it you'll get into the habit of praying the use me prayer. I've often said when you pray that, Lord, today use me, it's the most terrifying prayer because it always gets answered. I guarantee you pray that prayer and that day you will have an encounter. Your Frontline will confront you. There will be a moment. There'll be a situation when you can be fruitful. So I pray that all of us will set out this year praying daily that use me prayer. And again, let's just quote John 15 as we come to the end of this. My Father is glorified by this, that you bear much fruit. And in a few minutes we're going to sing a song which works so well for me in all this. The song says, go do something beautiful.